so I just started the recorder. So the first boon is where Nachiketa asks for his return to his father. The second boon is where he asks for a technique by which all the karmas of a soul can be nullified, and a person can attain heaven or Brahmalok, the highest plane of existence. So he is given the Nachiketa Yajna, which, if it's done 3 times, a soul can achieve heaven, and heaven meaning Brahmalok. And the Brahmalok is described as a place without fear and sorrow and very, very long life. And that's his second boon. The third boon is where he asks if there is existence beyond death. And he says, who else could I ask except you, who is the Lord of death? And Yama tries to tempt him with all kinds of materialistic things. He tries to tempt him with, infinite power, lots of wealth and fame, and becoming the king of the world, and all the pleasures, including women and singing and dancing and everything possible that could tempt a person to say, yes, yes, I want that, that's good enough for me. And he's not swayed. He's not swayed by all these temporary things that bring temporary pleasure. He sticks to his boon where he says, no, I want to know what is beyond death. I want to know that deathless state. And, all these other things I can gain anyway, but when will I get a chance to get such an answer, such a question answered? And when would I ever have such a guru who can tell me? So I would like to stick to my boon of asking this question. So after Nachiket passes this test, Yama continues with, it starts with telling him about Shreyas versus Preyas, where he says, that you should always choose that which is beneficial, that which is truthful, that which may be short-term pain but long-term gain. You should always choose that over pleasure that gives you short-term pleasure but it gives you long-term misery. And we also covered the Om Upasana last time. What is the vibration or the sound that takes you to the highest plane, the highest possible plane, closest to the self? And so Yama explains the meaning or the importance and the greatness of this sound, of this universal sound vibration, the pranav, the om. And that's where we left off. So today I wanted to continue and we can discuss the next few sections. So here, I had mentioned before that Kathopanishad is sort of the mother of the Bhagavad Gita, and a lot of the verses from Kathopanishad are actually also found in the Gita. So this next section, where it's called the Sankhya Yoga, is pretty much the same as what we find in chapter 2. In chapter 2, verse 11 onwards, Sri Krishna starts with this knowledge about the Atma. It's called Samkhya Yoga because it is the highest philosophy. So here also it's the same thing. So Yama talks about this. He says, the intelligent self, meaning the self or the Atma, is neither born nor does it die. It does not originate from anything, nor does anything originate from it. It is birthless, eternal, undecaying, and it is ancient. It is not killed even when the body is killed. So the sequence of words here really are important, and it describes the permanent existence of the Atma to Nachiket, where he's saying, it is not of linear time where we think of being born and we die, and Also, we always think in terms of a cause and effect. It says, it does not originate from anything. It's not that there was something before it, there was a cause or a mother or a womb or anything. The Atma is not born of anything, does not originate from anything, nor is it the cause, or nor does it let anything originate from it. It is untouched. It doesn't give birth, or the creation or the body or mind or nothing really originates from it. Even though it may seem that things are originating from it, but it's not. It is untouched. It is separate. It is not something, because then it would be definable. If something is originating from it, then it is again of some sort of linear time, it is definable. But because it is something which is causeless, birthless, um, it's very important to understand that it is very separate, or it's beyond, it's transcendental from anything that you see, like the body or mind, that come into being and go, which are temporary, do not come from it, even though we tend to think they do. So he continues and says, it's birthless, means it never takes birth. It is eternal, meaning it's beyond time. It's undecaying, means like everything else which is created will be born, first of all. Then it will grow, it will decay, and it will die. So it says, it's undecaying, and it is ancient. Ancient meaning from ever and ever. And also it is not killed when the body is killed. So it is eternal. It's not linked to the body when the body dies, that the Atma dies. So there is the answer for Nachiket. It says the Atma is not killed when the body is killed. So that's again from the Samkhya Yoga. We have seen the same verse in the Bhagavad Gita. And then again it continues, if the killer thinks that he kills, and if the killed thinks that he is killed, both of them do not know the truth. It does not kill, nor is it killed. So it's beyond all this killing or being killed. It's not a doer. It doesn't do anything as such. Now the next verse is very nice. It says, the self is subtler than the subtle, and greater than the great. So it is trying to put it beyond all our concepts of what is subtle and what is great. The self of ever living creature is lodged in the cave of the heart. A desireless man, free from willing and wishing, becomes free from sorrow and beholds, through the grace of a tranquil mind and calm senses, the glory and majesty of the inner self. So basically here it's describing to Nachiket that where the center of your existence lies in the body, or where it is most prominent, is in the cave of the heart, which so somewhere it's described as 10 fingers above the navel. And even in the Chandogya Upanishad, it's described as the cave of the heart is the center of your consciousness, or the seat of the soul. So how would you experience that? Meaning, how would you experience the Atma? And it says, where the mind is not going outward, because whenever you have desires, the mind is always moving outward into the materialistic realm. So when a desireless man, who's free from willing and wishing, the mind is not going outward, it's not distracted, and it's free from sorrow, and it's not engaged in emotions and feelings, and the mind has become tranquil and the senses are calm. Only when the waters are calm and peaceful can you see your reflection and see your depth. That's when there's complete stillness, and you're focused in that stillness on that inner being, is when you can experience the glory and majesty of the inner self. And again, this is, these words are just, it goes on to describe uh, it's contradictory words, because it's sort of like trying to break concepts that we have, because our mind can only understand or conceptualize things which can be measured, right? So this is giving contradictions here. So it says, while sitting, it travels far. While sleeping, it goes everywhere. That God who rejoices and rejoices not, who but you and I are able to comprehend him? So it's beyond comprehension. So these all these contradictions that are trying to break the barriers of what we think, and also go beyond duality. It's trying to say, that self is beyond the opposites. As bodiless in the midst of bodies, as permanent in the midst of the impermanent, and as great and all pervasive, the wise man who meditates thus on the self does not come to grief. Again, it's describing certain things about the Atma, which is, it is bodiless, it's permanent, it's all pervasive, omniscient, omnipresent. So the person who tries to who not tries but who meditates on that self will experience it as such and will not grieve, because then you know that you are permanent and eternal. So some of those descriptions of the Atma are given there. And then, it is not possible for the self to be known through study, not through the intellect, not through much hearing. He alone who chooses the self attains it. His attainment of the self is through its self-revelation of its own true nature. And this is an important verse. So it says that it's not possible for the self to be known through study, meaning you can keep on learning and attaining knowledge and reading and studying, but it is very limited. You cannot attain that Atma through just intellectual studying and accumulating knowledge and information. And it's not through intellect that you can attain it, nor through hearing. So here is a contradiction also, because you see, Nachiket is hearing this knowledge. So, but there is a difference here. It's not just that Nachiket is just hearing this knowledge, but he is hearing it through a Satguru, which gives it the difference. So what happens is, when you do hear it from a Satguru, and if you are the qualified student, this learning is not an intellectual learning. As you will see in Ashtavakra also, it's a realizational learning. So if we are the ready soil in which the seed is born, the realization sprouts of itself, because the ground is ready. You see, the right catalyst is there, the Guru being the catalyst, and the ground being ready, the seed being sown. It is not an intellectual learning that Nachiket is having here. It's a realizational. He's actually transforming, he's realizing, he's awakening as this transmission is happening almost. It's an energetic transmission, that a catalytic transmission that is happening to Nachiket, by which he's becoming self-realized. And it says here, right, the one who chooses the self attains it. So it's a single-pointed focus and desire to that I want the self and self alone and nothing else. You see, it's like a razor-pointed, single-pointed wish that you want to be who you truly are. And the important thing here is the last statement. It says, his attainment of the self is through the self-revelation of its own true nature. Meaning, it is finally that self, that Atma, that descends and opens the final veil. So from your self-effort, you can go, say, to the tip of your head, you go till the highest chakra, you go till the ceiling, You go till you touch the veil, you go to the highest you can possibly attain through your own self effort, being a sincere seeker, attaining all this knowledge from the right guru, and all of these things. But finally, the ceiling is open, the veil is lifted only when the higher self chooses to reveal itself of and shows its true nature. This is a very important aspect to understand, that finally it is the descent from above. Whether you call, like the devotional people will say that it was grace through Vishnu, or the grace of Shankar, or the grace of the Guru, or the grace of whoever they believe in. But the Advaitins, the Vedantins, will say that it is nothing else but your own self. There is no duality. It is that self that reveals itself, to its lower self, and thereby there is that union, that oneness. So, very interesting verse. And then it goes, the next verse is, he who has who has some qualifications, basically one who is free of bad conduct, whose senses are under control, the mind is concentrated, whose mind is also, the person whose mind is also not free from anxiety, he cannot attain the self through knowledge. So basically, you have to have good moral conduct, and you have to have your senses and mind. Now here, again, that's why I sent you the sadhana chatushtaya, because some of the qualifications were covered before, which is vivek and vairagya. I talked about vivek meaning to see the difference between that which is real and not real, that which is permanent and temporary. Vairagya meaning having dispassion towards that which is temporary. And then here you see the senses are under control, the mind is not is concentrated. So these qualities, or the qualifications of the students, cover here as the Shat Sampatti, which is Sama and Dhamma. Sama meaning that your mind is under control and your senses are contained. And we'll cover this again a little later when we talk about the chariot. So here again the qualifications of the student are being covered. And the next verse says, to the self, the Brahmana and the Kshatriya classes are both, as it were, the main dishes. I won't go into this in detail. To him, death itself is merely a dish. He who knows this.
Vinita, this is Naina. I did like that Veda thing that you sent us. That was much, it explains in a very kind of a common language.
Which one?
The one that you linked, that you had sent for the Viveka and Vairagya under the Veda.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So that one explains it pretty good, what you are trying to say, that you have to realize it, self-realization needs to be done. But the one that we have been studying for the, I think it's a Chinmayanand's Kathopanishad, that one is pretty confusing how they put it.
That's the one I'm reading from, the PDF that I'd sent. Yeah, it's one of the Swamis of Chinmaya Mission.
Okay, but that says that teacher cannot make you realize, you have to realize it yourself. So here Yama is giving him the instruction, or not the instructions, but the secrets or details or whatever about the self-realization, how he can, who can get through beyond death. That is the idea, right? For the Kathopanishad, have to go beyond death.
Not how to go beyond death, but what is being discussed here is, do you actually exist beyond death? I mean, obviously the body doesn't exist, but do you, what is there an aspect of you, or do you still exist after you die is the question. I don't think it says anywhere that a teacher cannot or a guru cannot give it to you. Basically, what I was reading was that, it's not just through study or by gaining knowledge and, using your intellect and mind and hearing knowledge that you can realize the self. But yes, it, of course, if you have a Sadguru who is a realized master, and if you're the qualified student, that is the difference. But I mean, you can absolutely, in our here I don't remember any particular verse, but Nachiket talks about saying that you are the right teacher for me. Who else can give me this knowledge? But it's not intellectual knowledge that's happening over here. It's actually realizational. That awakening is what's happening. So there's a difference between intellectual knowledge and a realizational attainment. It's different. But yeah, I mean, it can be confusing if it's not explained in a greater context and explained properly. It can be confusing if you read it on your own. But it's good once you have heard the explanation, it's good as a reference point to go back and go back to it, if it, rather than taking notes. It's like sort of your notebook. You can go back to something. But I think the explanations are pretty good in this one that I sent. There are many other explanations as well.
Yeah, no, I understand that part, but it is still the explanation that is coming here, like for the essential qualifications and stuff. It doesn't become, I don't know. I mean, for me, self and realization, between that difference is very kind of like, personally for me, is very much confusing in sense. I'm not at that high level either.
The self and realization.
But
could you repeat that?
Yeah.
What is confusing?
The self, like everywhere they are referring, if the self is forgotten, any amount of study is of no avail. But then sometimes they talk about self and sometimes they talk about realization.
Yeah, realization is when realization is the sort of awakening that you are the self. The self meaning Atma.
Okay.
So realization is like you wake up in the morning and you realize that you're Naina. You were dreaming, you were in deep sleep, but when you wake up in the morning and you realize, oh, I am Naina actually. That's the realization. That's an awakening.
Yeah, no, I get that self part of it, because self, soul, those things are kind of like synonymous in a sense, that realizing that I'm a soul or I'm a self, being aware of it makes a lot of kind of a difference to understand this whole knowledge.
Correct. The whole
but when they talk about okay.
Go ahead.
I don't mean to. I'm sorry.
No.
I will think and
the main.
No, I'll send you out. I think I'm confusing myself also. So let me just send you the WhatsApp and maybe.
Yeah, sure. We can talk. Yeah, the main thing here is the whole point of Kathopanishad is to see, is there a permanent aspect to our existence which does not die, because we usually associate ourselves with things which are temporary, right? Like the body is temporary, so, and we don't really know what really happens to the mind, but at least to the body we know. But most people will identify themselves as the body and the mind. So the whole understanding here that Nachiket is trying to gain, and for all of us, he's asking this question, and if there is existence beyond death, and if that does not die, if that is eternal, there are two things. One is that you can have a higher level of existence, but it's just a much longer life. So he talks about heaven. If you go to heaven, yes, you will live for a very, very long time, but even that will end one day. But there is that which is eternal or infinite, which is beyond even that. And that is where he talks about the self. And that self is not something very far away beyond the seventh lok, and it's beyond the satlok and all. It's right here within you. It is very accessible. So when we talk about God or Brahman as something separate from us, away from us, it becomes very hard for us to uh, know what that Brahman is, because you always think of it as something separate from you. But something which is within you and which is the same as Brahman, and if you can experience it, you don't have to go anywhere. It's been lodged inside you for you to know and to experience it. So the body is sort of your lab. Like here it says a chariot, but it's sort of your temple. And the that that God who you call God or Brahman or Ishwar or whatever is in the core of your being. And if you experience it there, you have experienced that oneness, that allness, that Brahman. So that this whole thing, this whole conversation is about that. So now here, like this verse, it says, two drinkers of the inevitable fruits of their good works in the world have entered and are seated in a deep hidden cave, which is the abode of the Most High. These two are different as shadow and light, so say the knowers of Brahman, those who worship the five fires, and the performers of the Nachiketa sacrifice. So from here on onwards, you'll see there is this repeatedly. It talks about you as the individual soul, the jeev, okay, the individual soul. Now the individual soul is one thing and Atma is another thing. The individual soul is that which has a limited understanding of itself, its identity. The jeev, the soul, thinks that I am the body, the mind, and the subconscious, and it separates itself from Atma. It becomes like an entity, and it has an identity, and so that is the limited soul, the jeev, which has created this illusionary separation, a veil. It doesn't really exist. It's like a dream. It's imaginary. It's not really there. There is really no separation, but it has created it. And then you have the Atma, which is undivided. It's one. There's no limitation to it. It's eternal. It's infinite. It's everywhere. And it talks about these two, which are within you in the cave of your heart. And that is where it is described that these two are like shadow and light. So the Atma being light, and light has existence, and light always signifies consciousness, wisdom, and all that stuff. And shadow doesn't really have an existence. It is the absence of light. It's not real. I mean, it doesn't. Shadow is not an object. It's so that is like the jeev, that I was telling you, is this imaginary separation. So that is why the word shadow is used here. So it talks about these two are actually within yourself, seated inside you, both the jeev as well as the Atma. And so that is the main thing that continues here. And they're drinking, what are they drinking? They are drinking the truth, rhythm. I don't want to go too much into detail. You can look into the commentary. the next verse talks about there is a bridge for the performers of the sacrifice and for reaching the indestructible highest Brahman. There is a bridge. And for the performers of the sacrifice as well as for reaching the indestructible highest Brahman. The latter takes one beyond all fear to non-duality, whereas beyond sorrow to the other shore leads the Nachiketa fire. So here it's talking about the bridge to the other side. You remember the Nachiketa fire will only take you to Brahmalok or Satyalok, to heaven. So it will take you beyond death, but it will take you only till a point, which is the heavens, where it's beyond sorrow. But the other bridge is for the ones who want to cross beyond Maya and to reach the highest Brahman, where it will take you beyond all fear. And why is it beyond all fear? Is because it is non-duality. As long as there is duality, there will be fear. But when you are the only one and there is no other, what can you be fearful of, right? So that's why it's discussed here, the bridge, it's just repeated here. Now the next section is about the chariot. And there's a few verses on the chariot. And see, the chariot's symbolism is deliberately used in the Gita as well. So if you think of the chariot in the Gita, there's 5 horses and Krishnji is holding the reins. So there are the horses, there are the reins, and Sri Krishna is holding the reins. Arjun is the passenger or the rider, right? And then you have the chariot itself. So here it says, know that the Jeev to be the master of the chariot. So here the Jeev is like Arjun, who's sitting on the chariot, who's the master of the chariot. The body is the chariot itself. The intellect is the charioteer. The charioteer here would be the intellect, who is Sri Krishna. The mind being the bridle. So the mind is the reins, okay? And the senses are the horses which can run on these sense objects on the road. And the self associated with the body, senses, mind is the enjoyer, so say the wise ones. So I don't want you to get confused here, but essentially the last sentence can really throw you off. It says the self is associated with the body, senses, mind, and is also the enjoyer, so say the wise ones. Just understand it as that all of these things, your individual soul, the Jeev, the body, the intellect, the mind, the sense objects, they are nothing else but the manifestation of the Atma. And so if the senses are enjoying, if the mind is enjoying, indirectly the self is also enjoying. Okay, so we'll just leave it at that, because there are various other texts which will say that the self does not enjoy and all this, but here it is in the context that this is being discussed, it's trying to tell you that the chariot, everything is nothing but the manifestation of the self, of the Atma. Okay?
But Vinita, you said that nothing is a manifestation of Atma. Nothing manifests from Atma.
Yes. So that's why I said, don't get confused, because, it is like when you are dreaming, okay? And if you have sorrow in your dream, you will cry, or you will laugh, or you will feel the emotions, you will see, even though you are not really experiencing them. Okay? So that's why these contradictory things, it's very hard to describe this, what is really happening in creation. Depends on your perspective of how you're looking at reality. So if you're looking at reality from the perspective of Atma, from the perspective of Brahman, nothing is happening. The Brahman is not doing, the Atma is not creating, Atma is not doing anything. Okay, from the aspect of Atma, the person who is dreaming, the person who is dreaming is not really actively involved in it. The dream has manifested, but it is a dream, it's an illusion. Okay, but if you see from the other perspective, where you look at it from a dreamer and look at from the dream, what is happening in the dream, the person who is sleeping is not really experiencing it, but it is happening in the dream. So from the perspective of the dream has manifested from the waker, the person who's dreaming has come from him. So that's why, it depends which perspective you take of reality, of existence. That's why it can be confusing. If you don't understand the perspective, they'll be contradictory. The knowledge will be contradictory. So we can talk offline if that's confusing. So the simile of the chariot continues. It says, he who has the non-discriminating intellect, having an unrestrained mind always, his senses are uncontrollable and like the wild horses of the charioteer. But he who is of discriminating intellect, Vivek, having restrained the mind always, which is sama, the senses are controls, which are dhamma. The Shat Sampatti, the Vivek is described, sama dhamma is described, like the tame horses of the charioteer. So it's essentially saying that you have been given certain instruments to be in creation, and there are two routes you can take. Again, like Shreyas and Preyas, the Shreyas will have the discriminating intellect, the restraint over the mind, control of the senses, and so forth. But the one who wants pleasure will have the wild horses, uncontrolled senses, and so forth. So it depends how you want to use what has been given to you. So he who is of non-discriminating intellect, ever thoughtless and always impure, he never attains that goal. Instead, he gets further into samsara. But he who is of discriminating intellect, ever thoughtful and ever pure, he verily attains that goal, whence he is not born again. One who has good intellect as his charioteer, and a well-controlled mind as his reins, such a man attains the end of his journey, that supreme abode of Vishnu and the all-pervading. So that's self-explanatory, right? There's not really much other deeper knowledge to that. So I'll just quickly finish this so that we finish this section. Beyond the okay, this is a little let's cover this next time, because this gets a little bit more complicated. It talks about the cosmology, and I don't want to get into the cosmology in this session. I think we've talked enough. So next time what we'll do is we'll cover from this section onwards. Because now the next few verses are going to go into the cosmology, where it talks about, how you have the physical world, the subtle world, the causal world, and all these things. I think that's enough for today.